Hello everyone and welcome to another game from round 12 of the 2021 Candidates Tournament. It's Wang Hao versus Ian Nepomniachtchi, and this game stirred some controversy online between some of you, and we're gonna get to that, but it doesn't appear that there is much merit to this. But you'll be the judge of that. So without further ado, let's check it out. Wang Hao versus Ian Nepomniachtchi. Nepomniachtchi is the leader of the tournament, and if Hao wins this, then I guess he could be maybe still fighting for the actual win, but it's hard to say. So here he opens with e4, and I would just like to mention, for those of you who maybe still haven't joined, we have a Telegram channel where we discuss things, and where you can receive a notification for a video earlier if maybe you don't receive YouTube notifications. So if you guys are interested in that, I will put a link to it in the description below. We had some problems. If you were from India, you couldn't join like a month ago, but we fixed that, and now everyone should be able to join. So if you're still into that, do join us. We have a really good time there. So after e4, Nepo decided to go with e5. We have knight to f3 and knight to f6. Nepo goes for the Petrov defense. We have knight captures on e5 and now d6, chasing the knight back. Knight to f3 and now knight captures on e4. So this is all very standard stuff. My personal favorite is knight to c3, but here we have d3, and this is not this is not new. This is in fact an old way to play this, but I guess it's coming back into fashion. So here knight f6, we have d4 and now d5. Black also grabs more space in the center. We have bishop to d3 and bishop to d6. So very just a nicely proportional development. We have queen to e2 check, and Nepo very happily obliges. He doesn't want to play anything too crazy. He's leading the candidates tournament, so he has the black pieces against a renowned chess player like Wang Hao, so he's very much happy slow playing this. So queen captures on e7, king captures now, and castles. We have knight to c6, just developing. You could also play, I guess, c6, but this isn't really how this line is played. So knight to c6, and now here we have c3, and c3 is a new move in this position. There's a known game, rook to e1 check, was played. Maxim Vachier-Lagrave defeated a young Krzysztof Duda in the Skilling Open last year, or rather this year. Let me just check. Can't really remember. Yeah, it was last year, of course. In the Skilling Open, MVL defeated Duda. And here, after knight to c6, we have c3, and it is now, as of move 11, that we have a completely new game. So here, h6, taking away the g5 square from the knight and the bishop, and knight to h4 now. Here, Hao wants to play knight to f5 and force black to give up the dark square bishop. But this is exactly what Jan is going for. We have rook to e8, preparing to castle artificially. Knight to f5 check, and Nepo castles. Now, he gives up the bishop pair, but as you'll see, he will close up the position as much as possible to make the Hao's bishop pair not fully operational. So bishop captures on f5, king to f8. Now the artificial castling is complete, and g3 now. We have knight to e7, attacking the light square bishop, and bishop back to h3. We have knight to c8, as you all know, the strongest move is with the knight back, and now knight to d2. And here a5. We have a4, preventing b5, and now c6. So black wants to keep a nice close position, so that white's bishop pair will not come fully operational. So here rook to d1. It's a bit hard for white to get his pieces into the game. He still needs to get a good square for the knight. He needs to bring the bishop into the game, and only then can he confront black's very strong rook on e8. So here rook to d1. Now you can bring your king, for example, to f1. Maybe you can trade rooks like this. We have h5, and now knight to f1. We have g6 by black, and now f3. We have knight to b6, and now, knight to b6, and now b3, preventing the knight from coming to c4. So the position is very much closed, and this is what knights enjoy. We have king to g7, and now king to f2. Knight b back to d7, now with ideas of maybe bringing the rook over to c8, maybe pushing c5, and bishop to g5 now. Now the bishop is developed, the rooks have been connected. and knight to f8, bringing the knight to e6 to put pressure on this bishop on g5. So rook to e1, finally Hao can bring his rooks to the open e file, and the knight to e6 now. And like we said, the position is very much closed, and maybe, just maybe, white should capture here, because the bishops aren't doing all that of an impressive job in a closed structure such as this one, but Hao decides to keep it for later. Maybe the position opens up, maybe the bishop pair will come fully operational. So rook 8 to c8, now preparing to strike in the center with c5 and bishop to d2. If the c file opens up, you will have the c3 pawn nicely defended, but also if, for example, captures, you will be also attacking the a5 pawn, so bishop to d2 makes sense. c5 by Nepo, and now d captures on c5. There's pressure here, so of course you have to react to this. d captures, bishop captures with check, king to g2 now, and bishop back to b6. We have rook 8 to b1, now preparing b4, and rook to c6 now. Now maybe you want to double up on the c file, put pressure on this backwards c3 pawn. We have b4, and now knight to c7. So what do you do here? We have b captures, or rather before capturing here, we have rook captures on e8, knight captures on e8, and only now b captures on a5. We have bishop captures on a5, and now rook captures on b7. So this is all very nicely done. And now you could try and be tricky with something like d4, saying that, okay, if c captures on d4, then I win the game. Bishop captures, knight captures, and rook to c2 attacks the knight. You can't move it. There's a king on g2. That's it, white resigns. However, after d4, you also have to consider c4. It's quite a sneaky idea. And then who knows what might happen. You don't really want to trade here, because then captures and all of a sudden white has two pass pawns. You don't really want to play against that. So instead, after rook captures on b7, nothing so fancy. We have knight to d6 now. First pushing the rook back. We have rook to a7 now, attacking the bishop, also defending his pass pawn, and bishop captures on c3 now. And now, well, you could capture here. First, we have bishop to d7. Now, offering a trade, this bishop that's pretty much doing nothing for this knight that could become very strong. So either you move the rook to something like rook to c4, or you capture here. Nepo decides to capture. We have rook captures, but before rook captures, we have bishop captures on c3, getting rid of that one. Rook captures, and now rook captures on d7. We have rook to c6, now preparing not only is the knight defended, but also you are getting ready to play rook to a6 to attack this pawn. But first, rook to e7. So what do you play here? Well, if you go for something like rook to a6 right away, then rook to e5, and then this pawn is under attack. And if you traded this pawn for this pawn, then it's we can just call it a draw. But it's also move 39. We also need to make one more move to reach time control. So here Nepo plays a bit more complicated rook to c2 with check, and here we have king to g1. And with this move, we've reached move 40, and we are granted additional time. And now Nepo starts pushing his pass pawn, so d4. And now this is just beautiful. We have rook to d7, attacking the knight, and now knight to f5. And the beautiful thing is that you can't kick away the knight to win this pawn, because if you do this, just knight h4, and now you can't win the pawn because knight f3 check picks up the rook. So there's also that in the position. So this pawn is very much safe here, and Hao just starts pushing his own pass pawn. So a5, and now rook to a2. We have rook to a7, and as you know, they say put a rook behind the pass pawn, not in front of the pass pawn. So it'd be, of course, much better if the white rook was here for Hao, but it's not. So it's a bit more problematic. We have king to f6, preparing to bringing the king into the game, and a6 now. We have h4, trying to bust open black's king side and ruin his pawn structure, and you don't really have a good move here, because if you, or rather, okay, for example, if you capture here, just knight captures, your pawn structure is completely ruined. If you go g4, then knight to e3, extremely strong. What do you do here? If you trade, then d captures on e3. This is now covered. If rook to a1 check comes, you're going to have to move, and then, you know, the pawn just wins the game. There's no rook to e7. The king took care of that. So After h4, not really good to capture or to push g4. So here we have rook to a8, making room for this final push to a7, and now comes h3. And this is a very important move because it takes away the g2 square from the white king. Also, the f2 square is taken by the rook, so you have to be careful. At some point, ideas like rook to g2 are coming. So here we have a7, and now king to e7, just taking care of all of the squares on the back rank. Here you could easily blunder a game. You always have to be careful when your opponent pushes the pawn all the way up to the board and there's a rook behind it. You don't want to play something like king to e6, then just the rook delivers check. You have to move the king, and then queen comes into the game and you can resign. But after a move like king to e7, of course, such things are not possible. So here we have g4, pushing the knight back, and now knight to d6. We have rook to b8, giving up the a7 pawn, but with a very nice idea. Here, Hao finds a way on how to eliminate this d4 pawn. We have rook to b8, preparing a8 queen, so you have to capture the a7 pawn. There's no arguing that. So rook captures, and now rook to b4. Now you have to push the pawn because this the f5 square is taken, the b5 square is taken, so you have to push it, and now rook to b3, and there's no defending the pawn now. So this pawn is lost. We have rook to a2 by Nepo, at least grabbing some activity with the rook, and now rook captures on d3. Now comes knight to c4, and here already you can very easily make a mistake, because it's not easy to make a move for white. What do you play here? For example, if you try something like f4, which makes sense, you want to grab a lot of space here, rook g2 check, and then after king h1, rook f2, and now your knight and the f4 pawn are under attack, and well, you've just given up a pawn. So here we have knight to g3 by Hao. Very interesting is knight to e3. I had to check this because there was a lot of controversy about this game online, so I had to check. Knight to e3 does seem to lead to a definite draw, but I don't know how easy it is to decide this from a human perspective, because I've checked the table bases, and the table bases say that after all the trades are done here, for example, knight e3 captures with check, king f6. Now you have to find this f4 move, which attacks the h3 pawn. Now we go into this rook g2 check, king h1, rook captures on g4, rook captures on h3, and rook captures on f4. So this is a table-based draw, but I don't know if it's how easy it is to deduce that from this position where Hao had to decide what to play here. So instead of knight to e3, he went for knight to g3, which is not a mistake, but it does allow Nepo some very cool ideas, like rook to g2 with check, king to h1, and now just king to f8. So what do you play here? Again, it's your move. Rook to c3, just attacking the knight, and then now comes knight to b2. There is the seemingly cooler rook to d2, and now if you capture the knight, then it's just rook d1 check, knight f1, and rook captures on f1 checkmate, because this is covered. But of course this is not forced. After a move like rook to d2, we're just going to play king to g1, and now we're going to have to repeat rook g2 check, king h1, and then play the move Nepo already played. So in case you were wondering why Nepo went for knight to b2 instead of this cool move. So knight to b2, and now rook to c8 with check, king to g7, and now comes rook to d8. Instead of this, you could try rook to b8, but you really have to keep an eye on d1 and d3, because if you try something like this, knight d1 and knight to f2 will be checkmated. There's no defending this. Look at this beautiful checkmate. This is nicely covered, so there's no defending this. So you absolutely have to cover the d1 and d3 squares, and now Nepo goes for rook to f2. And again, what do you play here? It's again a very tough decision for white. If you go rook to b8, you have to try something. The f3 pawn is being threatened, so you might try this. Then if captures, of course, we can grab the knight. But you run into the exact same idea. Rook to d2. And what do you play now? Rook to d1 is the threat. You're going to get checkmated. And after king g1, now we play king to g2 check. And now, of course, if we go king to h1, then the same checkmate applies. So we're going to have to go to f1, and then you just lose the h2 pawn for free. And this is now, will be winning for black, no doubt. So instead, after rook to f2, we have king to g1 right away by Hao. and now comes rook captures on f3. And it's not a problem, this is only one pawn. We have knight to e4, and now comes rook to e3. Again, putting pressure on this knight, knight back to g3, and here Nepo played rook to a3, and it was in this position on move 59 that Wang Hao resigned the game. As well, it's not like there's nothing more to be done. There are things that can be maybe done here, but both of them agree that, well, Nepo said after the game that this is lost for white, and Wang Hao said that he's, well, very sure that this is lost for white. But if you try to make moves here for white, you're gonna see that there really are no moves that you can play, because nothing just works. The king will never get into the game. I mean, this h2 pawn is just too weak. The h3 pawn is very hard to be reached by white, and the g4 pawn is weak simply because the h3 pawn isn't there to help defend it. And if you get the king into the game, you can very easily win the pawn. So one thing that could happen is, let's say rook to e8, you make a move with white, you have to play something. We go, for example, you want to maybe try to somehow trade off the rooks, then win this pawn, or trade off the knights, then maybe get the rook into the game and somehow eliminate black's h3 pawn. So we might see something like knight to d3, and then if rook to e3, now of course pinning the knight, we just play rook a1 check. And if knight to f1, now blocking this, knight to f4 nicely defends our h3 pawn. And if rook to f3, we have to play this because, well, if the king comes to g5, it's just over. So you have to force g5, and then it's just, I mean, this is so disgusting to play with white. You don't want to be in this position because you can't win. I mean, chances are, okay, there of course exists a chance that Nepo will mess something up and allow some sort of a super theoretical draw, but Wang Hao doesn't think that such a thing is possible, and that's why he resigned here after rook to a3. Or I haven't seen the interview, so if you guys have any greater insight as to why he resigned, you are welcome to share in the comments. I will pin it so everyone else can see, but I'm pretty sure that that's why he resigned. And there's nothing for him to gain. He's not winning this game. He is not becoming a challenger to Magnus Carlsen, and here I think he just lost all will to play this game, because I mean, here you could suffer for the next 4 days, and it doesn't really make sense because you still have to play 2 more games in the candidates tournament, and better to be refreshed for them. Even though I guess tomorrow is a rest day, so could be anything, but I don't think we are, looking at some sort of a controversy here, or a conspiracy. I think this is just a well fought game that he couldn't hold, and a resignation was in order. I will show more games from this round, but I will show them tomorrow. So for those of you who still don't know how the other games ended, close your eyes and close this video, because I will now show the standings after round 12. So these are the standings. There you have it. After 12 rounds, Ian Nepomniachtchi is still in the lead, even though Anish Giri played that beautiful game against Fabiano Caruana. He defeated him, and we thought that he would at least catch up to Nepo, but with winning, by winning this game against Wang Hao, Ian Nepomniachtchi still hangs on to first place with 8 points. Then we have Anish Giri with 7.5, Maxim with 6.5, Fabi with 6, Grishuk with 5.5, Wang Hao and Dingliren with 5, and Kirill Alexeyenko with 4.5. And I don't know, I don't think Fabi is no longer in it, to win it. I think Maxim still has a chance to catch up to Nepo, if Nepo of course loses both of his games, but it's not going to be easy. So I think 3 of them still have a chance. We're going to see. So it's going to be either Nepo, Giri, or MVL. But 2 more rounds to go, anything can happen. So we're gonna enjoy that when it happens. So yeah, that's the game. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and have calmed yourself regarding whether this is a conspiracy or not. I would like to thank Lucas Berglund, Robert Launier, Muhammad Salif Safa, Jakob Gonzalez, and Daniel Silverberg for your contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing with the coverage of the candidates, checking up on your wonderful suggestions, and whatever else happens in the chess world. So thank you all, I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day.